So we'll just start very briefly. He was born in Waikiki in Honolulu. This is where he learned a lot of the water skills that he would later bring to California. So diving, surfing, rowing, swimming, all of these things that kind of form the foundation of California beach culture. So the California beach culture I'm really talking about is the one that if you ask one of my students in Springfield, Missouri, what do you think about if I say California beach culture? What are the things they're going to say? Do you think what's going to pop into their head?
Surfing.
Surfing, right? What's that? Muscle Beach. Yeah. Baywatch, Gidget. So those types of things, the $1 billion surf industry, they're probably wearing Quicksilver and Hurley and Hang Ten, those types of clothes. So that's really the beach culture I'm talking about. California has had a beach culture as long as people have lived on California's coast, right? Even before California was California, you had Native Americans who lived on the coast and they had their own culture, and there was a water culture as well. So that's not really the one that I focus on in this book. It's really, what Freeth did was he brought a Native Hawaiian perspective to California, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But really it's this combination of surfing and lifeguarding that created the foundation of the California beach culture that you and I recognize today. So that's kind of the argument that I make in my book. So this is Freeth's family. I've never seen a picture of his father or his mother or even his siblings. And I was digging around in the Hawaii State Archives and there it was. This is Licen Island, which sits about 900 miles northwest of Honolulu. So on the globe you can see the Hawaiian Islands out there in the middle of the North Pacific. In the close-up on the right, you've got those Hawaiian Islands there, and there's this little dot. That's Licen Island, right? The picture. So what happens on Licen Island is millions of migrating seabirds land on it and have for millennia and still land on it today. And they leave a lot of guano, which is rich in fertilizer. So his father, who was English, ran a guano mining operation for 4 years, and then he would bring the family there. And he's the guy who looks like he's in the jailbird outfit, which I guess was the style among guano mining managers at the time. Freeth's mother was Native Hawaiian, so that connected Freeth to the Native Hawaiian traditions of swimming and surfing and that whole culture, that water culture. His oldest brother is Willie, standing. His next oldest brother, Charlie, is sitting, and his youngest sister is over there on the right, and there's an Asian servant there. You can see some of the albatross that hang out. Literally, there'll be hundreds of thousands of birds, and there's nothing on this island but scrub brush and guano and birds. Freeth's father had to build that house you can see behind him, and there's no fresh water. The only fresh water is what comes in the rain. So if you look really closely, behind that house, you can see there's this container that captures rainwater. It sort of comes off that metal roof, goes down this little pipe, and then they collect it because the water is too brackish, too salty to drink on the island. So very spare light on there, very hot. I mean, not a lot of shade, obviously. And then the winter swells would just pound that island. There's nothing to protect it, right? So this is where young Freeth, he's the little boy leaning against his father, he would have learned swimming and diving here and rowing and landing boats. He would have seen his father manage, mostly it was Japanese workers there who were mining the guano for $1 a day. It's really physical, hard work. And then, he's got 2 brothers. I had 2 older brothers too, and they would have had swimming contests, they would have had all kinds of things. So these were the skills that he developed and that were fairly new when he arrived in California. One last point, this is 1893, so you can't really see it, but there is a Hawaiian flag flying above that house. So in 1893, a group of US businessmen overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy. And then the Freeths were not there for that. They were on Licen Island. So by the time they got back, the Hawaiian monarchy had become a republic. And those American businessmen were supported by US Marines. So this is sort of a historical moment that the Freeths were not actually on the islands for. We are jumping ahead about 14 years. That's Freeth on the right, of course, and he has a surfboard there that's the basic template that he would use for the rest of his life. Sometimes you hear, oh, you know, in those early years, those surfboards were 15 feet long and they weighed 200 pounds, but you can see that's actually not true. This is 8 feet tall, 2 feet wide. It's got a squared off tail and no fin, of course, and no leash. Right? So that weighed about 40 pounds. And maybe get a few pounds. There's nothing to protect it, to seal it, right? So we would get waterlogged and then you'd have to just take it out of the water and leave it on the beach and then it would dry out. So those surfboards, there's not really many of them left because it just was really hard. Like each time they would dry out, it would expand and they would break apart. So that surfboard, Freeth was a diver. He was the top diver in the islands. He was one of the top swimmers. He was the top surfer. And what he did was he used that surfboard like a diving platform. So he loved to perform for people. He loved to give exhibitions. And that's really why he came to California. He was hired to give surfing exhibitions right next door in Venice. And he gave them here in Santa Monica. It's one of the great reasons why I was really looking forward to this talk tonight because, I mean, how many cities can really boast a better aquatic tradition than Santa Monica? You think about the lifeguards here, the surfers, the beach clubs in the 20s. This was the heart of California beach culture. It really emanates out of Santa Monica. And I was born here too, so it's kind of coming full circle. And then the gentleman on the right, you may recognize, who is Jack London and his wife Charmaine. So they arrived on this boat that Jack London had built called the Snark, and they were going to sail it for 7 years and go around the world. And they landed in Honolulu first. They had some problems. They didn't quite make it. So 2 years, and then Jack London got sick and had to fly home. But they made it, for a couple of years. So here he is. He meets Freeth on the beach at Waikiki. Freeth is giving surf lessons and exhibitions. And of course, Freeth gives Jack London a surf lesson. And what's London going to do? He's going to write about it, right? He gives him a surf lesson. He's out there for 4 hours. He gets really badly burned. So he's got to spend the next week inside, crawling across the floor because the back of his legs, how that Hawaiian said it's just these wets on his back and the back of his legs. He can't even walk, but he can write, so he writes this essay about learning how to surf. And he mentions Freeth a couple times, so that's going to boost George Freeth a little bit. When he decides to come to California, he's going to use that renown that he had. And London is basically writing for white mainlanders, right? So this is his audience, and he is boosting surfing. So most people know about surfing. They know what happens in the Hawaiian Islands. But London is saying, hey, I'm a white guy. I can surf too. You don't have to be Native Hawaiian. So this is a moment that scholars have really picked out. This is a moment where Native Hawaiians begin to become erased from their own history. And you have promoters like Jack London and Alexander Hume Ford, who recent arrivals in the islands, and they basically shine a spotlight on surfing. But Freeth really, one of my arguments is that he represents this cultural continuity of Native Hawaiians practicing their own sport. So Native Hawaiians, there's a myth that they gave up on surfing, that they let it die, but Freeth is proof that it didn't, right? He's got that Native Hawaiian lineage. So I'm going to jump back just because we're in Santa Monica, just to give you an idea about the historical importance of Santa Monica. Here we are, Los Angeles Herald, August of 1889. Here's a guy who wants to start a surfboard club or a surfboat club in Santa Monica. He's from Pomona, and this just pops up in the newspaper. And these are the kind of random events that pop up and then you never hear anything about it. Did he actually start a surfboard club? Apparently he came down to the beach and did some surfing here. So 1889, that's really, really early. The earliest we know of surfing in California is 1885 up in Santa Cruz. Some Hawaiian royals, 3 princes, paddled out. They were going to military school in Santa Cruz. But this is only 4 years later, and here it is in Santa Monica. 1907, this is the first advertisement when George Freeth arrives in Venice. So he gets hired by Abbot Kinney, right, who started Venice in 1904. So this is the first advertisement. They don't even have his name. They just called him the Hawaiian Surf Rider. So there was another kid, a high school student, who came over with George Freeth, and they got paid $20 a day to do surfing. You know, Abbot Kinney and Venice of America, that resort, he's trying to bring people out. So what better than to put a couple Hawaiians in the water, you know, and it apparently brought out thousands of people. But I'm going to read a little, a brief description of this from this advertisement, just to give you an idea of what they thought about surfing at the time. So, what did it say? Hawaiian Surf Riders, free exhibition by the famous Hawaiian Surf Riders, 10, 2, and 4. These skillful gentry will also give lessons in their peculiar art. So, I love it. Surfers are skillful gentry, you know, and they're artists as well. So this surfers, I think the reputations come down in the world a little bit. But Abbot Kinney was really trying to educate people in the European traditions and global traditions as well. So he didn't just want people to have fun. There's the carnival rides and all of that. He built his pier. They had lectures. They had bands and music, all kinds of things. They had theater. So he really saw this resort as a way to educate people. But most people are like, here's my ticket. I want to be on the fun ride. You know, I want some popcorn, and I want to see the tall man standing next to, you know, the woman who's this high. You know, they kind of wanted the carnival, but he was an idealist. And here we go. Reports are filtering back to Honolulu, and Freeth is there advertising. So this tells us that he lands at Long Beach first, right? But he found the rollers there unsatisfactory, so he signed a contract with Abbot Kinney, and then he's able to get, you know, I think basically he came over here for the summer, a chance to earn some summer money, and probably didn't have any plans at the end of the summer for what he was going to do. And again, that sort of interests me because why does he decide to stay? I think he decides to stay because, or I like to think, that California needed him. They needed somebody with his skills, and I'll show you what I mean by that. This is Long Beach, opening day, July 4th, 1902. Henry Huntington is building his array of streetcars to get people across the Los Angeles basin. So basically what he does is he buys up property, he builds trolleys out to the property, draws people in with resorts and fun and games, and then sells them the property and makes a lot of money. So people are coming down. Think about what the population is doing in Los Angeles at this time. By 1910, there's 500,000 people in Los Angeles County. By 1920, there's nearly 1 million. By 1930, there's over 2 million. So this is one of the fastest growing regions in the whole United States, right? California is advertising itself as healthy and opportunity. I mean, Freeth came here for opportunity, did he not? So all of these people are in downtown Los Angeles, and it's hot, right, in downtown LA in July. And so people want to get out to the coast, and you can see what beach wear looks like in 1902. It's very Victorian. The men are in their suits, they got their hats, the women are in full dresses. They're going to head out to that pier so they can, remember, most people don't know how to swim, right? So they're walking above these waves, and that feels, if you don't know how to swim, and I mean, most of the people filling in the Los Angeles basin and Southern California in general are coming from the Midwest, from places like Missouri, where I live, right? There were $1 fares, famously, to get out to California because they wanted to sell real estate, right? So all of these people coming from the Midwest, they don't understand currents and riptides and waves, but they can walk out on this pier over the ocean, and that feels good. It even feels good today. They can go to that pavilion that's out there and listen to lectures. There would have been dances. There would have been shows. So all of these people are coming down here. This is where they're headed. Those people were walking north. This is just north. This is Long Beach. The resort is called the Pike. So they have those lights that go down the center of that promenade at night. It would have been all lit up. It would have been beautiful. You can barely make the Palos Verdes Peninsula in the background. There's a roller skating rink. There's carnival type games. There's vendors, and there's a bathhouse. So the bathhouses really anchored these resorts. You had salt water. They're basically big pools filled with salt water, heated salt water, and people were not comfortable swimming in the ocean, but they would be comfortable going into the swimming pools. And we know that there's a bathhouse, so you can see where the flags are. But you see out on the beach, that's a lifeguard station. So it's right in front of the bathhouse. So the lifeguards watch the swimmers in the bathhouse, and then the patch of sand out in front of the bathhouse. And you can see where all the people are congregated, right? Again, how they're dressed, and they want to be by the lifeguard stations because that's the safest place to be. This is what Freeth arrived to. This is 2 months before he arrives. There's a chronic problem in California. You see these newspaper articles on a weekly basis of people drowning for the exact reason that I mentioned earlier, because most people don't understand the oceans, right? So you have Arthur Custer, 22 years old, only married 7 months, goes out to the beach, and if you go north or south of that lifeguard station, you're on your own, swims out and drowns right in front of his bride's eyes, basically, and there's nothing she could do. And the normal way of rescuing people this time would have been gather a group of people, row out, but you know, by the time you get the people and you row out, somebody has already slipped under, or a current has pulled them away, and oftentimes they never find the people again, right? I mean, the only recourse they had was to keep showing up, and you see reports of family members who show up at the beach waiting for the waves to give up their dead. That was their only recourse. There were no municipal lifeguard organizations at all in California at this time. The only lifeguards were in the bathhouses. That's how the lifeguard programs grew. They came out of the bathhouses. So I have a question. In my book, I say, because I found this photograph and they said, this is Long Beach, you know? And then I saw a book over here and it says, Santa Monicans are enjoying it. So Sarah, do you know if this is?
I definitely recognize the photo. Yeah, I always thought about Santa Monica too, but we'll have to research it further.
I know. So I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that. Wait, we won't do that red light. I think this is Santa Monica. So, but you can see, even if it is Santa Monica, it doesn't matter. You can see why there's a chronic problem of drowning, right? Look at their outfits. They're made of wool. They're heavy. You get wet, and it's going to drag you down, right? Look at those two women on the far right wringing out the hems of their dresses. My right, your left. Notice behind them, there's that lifeline, right? So that lifeline would have been staked in the sand right in front of the lifeguard station and then staked out in the ocean. So people who didn't know how to swim would grab a hold of that rope and walk out, right? Which is not a problem if the water is calm. But if there's any kind of a swell, you can imagine what would happen. It could knock somebody off that rope, and then a current would pull them away, and you might never see them again. And it happens so fast. So Freeth gets hired in Venice, and because of what's happening in the newspapers, there's a need for somebody with his skills, right? Somebody who grew up around the water, who loves the water and loves the ocean. So he gives surfing exhibitions in Venice, and then he goes down to the southern edge of the Santa Monica Bay and gives them in Redondo Beach. So this is drawing people out. So this is Redondo Beach Bathhouse, where Freeth worked for many years as a lifeguard. You can see the slides going down. There would have been trapeze rings. So again, he's a performer. So he would take off on the trapeze, do backflips, do all kinds of turns as a diver would. There would have been diving boards on this side and perhaps on the other side. You can see that fountain there. Again, this is warm salt water. And at the time, the indoor plumbing wasn't in a lot of houses at the time, right? So when people wanted to get cleaned up, guess where they went? They flushed those pools out probably every 2 or 3 days. So I'm going to do a brief digression here. Freeth often had wage complaints. So one of the reasons why he was such a boon for California, it was great for California, but not necessarily for him, because lifeguards were hired just during the summer season. So June through September. After that, they were let go. People did not want to pay for year-round lifeguards as they do today. So Freeth was complaining about his wage. They said, we're not going to pay you. And so he said, okay, fine, I'm going to leave. So he left. They had other lifeguards. This is in the Redondo Beach bathhouse. The 3 guys come down from downtown LA and they want to jump into the pool. So they do. One guy goes off the diving board, hits the water, and he told his friend, I feel kind of funny. And he pulls himself up on that wall right by that fountain where his friend is sitting. His friend does a dive, goes down to the bottom, comes back up, and his other friend is gone. And so he thinks, oh, he just wasn't feeling good. He got out, maybe he went down to the beach. And there's this other guy there, so the 2 of them go looking for their friend, okay? They go along the beach, there's a swell running in, there's 2 lifeguards working in the bathhouse, and none of them saw this guy. So they go, they look around the beach, and then the lifeguard, the guy who runs this, is worried that the guy drowned out of the beach. So they get a bunch of people together, and they search the beach, and they can't find him. They know he's missing. By the time it closes down, so his friends wait around. By the time that the bathhouse is ready to close, his stuff, the guy who's missing, he had a changing room. So his ID is there, his keys. So he hasn't come back to get his clothes. So they're really getting worried. And so his friends think, oh, well, maybe he just forgot them. And he took a trolley back to downtown LA. Just wasn't feeling good. So they take the trolley back to downtown LA where their hotels are. They're not staying at the same hotel as their friend for whatever reason. And so they don't think about it. They don't check up on them. The next day, they're draining this pool and they find their friend in 8 feet of water, face up, underneath that fountain. So they didn't see him. The lifeguards didn't see him because that shadow, there was a fountain cast a shadow. You're too late. It's gone. And so my point is that never would have happened if Freeth were on duty. He was too aware of the dangers that water posed. He was too aware of any trouble. It happened in the water. So they agreed, and the next week, Freeth was back in that bathhouse. But that's what happens, right? You have to wait for a tragedy, and this keeps going every place he goes. So he goes from, to sort of finish, before my digression, he leaves his jobs because of wage complaints sometimes. So he goes from Los Angeles through Orange County down to San Diego eventually. So he's like this Johnny Appleseed of beach culture, spreading, surfing, swimming, diving, looking for work. And that turned out to be a boon for California beach culture. This is the inside of Redondo Beach bathhouse. You can see the diving boards, and you can see the rafters up there, right? So they would have, for giving shows, they would have dove out of those rafters. Freeth trained children to dive out of the rafters and to put on a show for people. And there's this one guy named Jake Cox in Venice who put on like a chicken suit. It looked like a chicken in it. It was wool or cotton. Some of you may have seen these pictures. And he doused himself in kerosene, got up in the rafters, lit himself on fire with a starter's gun, leaped, and put himself out of the pool. That's what they would do to draw people out to the resorts. The fire dive. This is Venice. So Freeth left Redondo, came back up to Venice after Abbot Kinney built a brand new bathhouse. You can see this is out on the Venice Pier. There's guys in the background, they're wearing like sailor suits. So those guys are ready to row a boat out. But look where Freeth is. You can't maybe make him out, but he's sitting in front. Freeth also played water polo. He started a water polo team. And just very briefly, he would train his lifeguards to play water polo because the same holds you use to break an opponent's, when an opponent grabbed you, they were the same moves that a drowning swimmer would do if you were a lifeguard and you swam out to save this person. So teaching them how to play water polo was a good way to teach them how to save lives. Those guys are already in their bathing suits, which gets us to this. So a year after Freeth lands, he saves 7 men all by himself, and that's heroic enough. But it's the way that he saved it. Remember that picture before? He was in his swimming outfit, so he was ready to save somebody by swimming out to them. So people didn't do that at the time. Remember, they rowed out. Nobody knew. They didn't have the skills that he had to swim out to save people. So he figured out in the Santa Monica Bay, most people get in trouble within about 100 yards of the shore. So it's much more efficient to just swim out if you have the skill. So really, the great thing about this, beyond saving those 7 lives, was that he started to teach lifeguards how to save people by swimming out. Right?
So did he save them one at a time? How do you know?
This big storm came through, and it's a whole ordeal, but I'll tell you very briefly. The sirens went off on the pier, and the waves were crashing over the pier. They're like 20 feet high, so they couldn't get a rowboat out. So the lifeguards are all volunteers. The lifeguards are trying to get out there, but the waves are just too big. So there's already a couple boats, and I don't know if you remember this, but the Venice Pier is built like a big T, right? So there's the rock breakwater, and then there's the end of the pier is like the top of the T, and then the base of the T goes out like that. So there's a rock breakwater, and waves are coming over the breakwater and the pier, smashing boats behind that T. So Freeth says, I'm gonna swim out to those guys. So there's 2 guys, they're all Japanese fishermen. 2 guys are rowing ahead of this storm. They're trying to get behind the pier, and they're exhausted because they're rowing as hard as they can. And this is December. Water temperatures in the mid-50s. So an hour and a half to 2 hours in that water, you're in hypothermia. Right? So he volunteers to dive off the pier over the rock breakwater, goes out to these guys, gets in the rowboat, rows them in, basically takes that rowboat and surfs it like a surfboard and lands them safely. Gets back out, goes back on the pier. Meanwhile, 2 other fishermen in another boat the sirens going off again. He says, I'm going to dive out again, swims out, gets in the boat, is able to row those guys behind the top of the T so that the other volunteer lifeguards can throw them lifelines. So that's 4. He's been in the water an hour and a half by this time, in cold, stormy surf. So he's exhausted, they're exhausted. They get him in this station, they give him a rub down, witch hazel or whatever. He's there, and the siren goes off again. He climbs off that bed and dives into the ocean a 3rd time. These 3 fishermen, their boat is capsized in the surf, and they're just clinging on to the bottom of this rowboat. So he gets these kind of belts. It's a belt around each one of them, sort of a floating belt, and then finally the crew is able to row out, and they put Freeth and those other 3 fishermen into the boat, and they save them all. So he wins the United States Life-Saving Gold Medal for this. These are given out by the United States Life-Saving Service under the Department of Treasury. So basically, he's a national hero. So this is a little article about Ocean Park. This is the bathhouse at Ocean Park. So you can see the fanciful architecture that they used to draw people out to the coast, right? So they had a problem. Remember, they take salt water from the ocean and they pump it into these pools. So they had a problem with the intake valve. So, who are you going to call when you got a problem with an intake valve? How about the guy who can dive 30 feet underwater, hold his breath for minutes at a time? They give George Freeth a ring, and he dives down there and gets it all sorted. And then he's pulling the pipe out, and there's this 2.5-foot fish that pops out and skitters him. So one of the great things that Freeth was able to do is he worked with children. So he taught them how to dive, how to swim, how to surf. This is Redondo Beach, okay? So he's got 4 of his proteges there. He built their surfboards. And this is the generation of surfers. Remember, most of their parents are coming from the Midwest, so they don't understand the ocean. But I mean, he learned from when he was a child how to swim and do all of those things. So he brought that. He didn't have that bias that they might have had on the mainland. It's like, well, you have to be much older to go in the ocean. You know, it's dangerous out there. And look, he's building them surfboards, right? But this is a generation of Californians in the 20s and 30s who are going to grow California beach culture. Kids are a lot less, they're more open to new things, right? They don't have the biases of their parents. And there's that same surfboard. He starts surf clubs, the first surf club in California, if we don't count that one from 1889. He loved to organize swimming clubs and to compete. He was a great competitor in swimming and water polo and all of these things. On your far left, that's Ludi Longer, who grew up in Redondo Beach. He would win a silver medal in the 1920 Olympics, a protege of George Freeth. That's Cliff Bowes right in the middle, sitting on that stone. Right? There's Freeth, of course, in the middle. Cliff Bowes was a diver sitting right in front of him. I'm going to jump ahead a couple years. And there's Cliff Bowes standing on his head on a surfboard. This is 1915. But can you see, like, this is the kind of thing that Freeth would do. And of course, the kids that he's training, they're going to emulate him. They're going to copy what he does. So I mentioned earlier about bringing a native Hawaiian perspective to California, and this is exactly what I mean. Freeth would say, yes, the ocean is dangerous. Yes, you have to respect it. But you know what? The ocean is a lot of fun too, and there's a lot of pleasure to be had there. And he showed them. He stayed during his 12 years and sort of trained them, taught them. And so he made a lot of great rescues in his time here. But it was this day-to-day teaching kids, and men and women, how to swim and surf and pull stunts like this. That's really the foundation of California beach culture. And he worked with young women too. These are the Seaweed Sisters out of Venice, right? So adorable. I love finding newspaper images like this. So he came from, this is also a native Hawaiian perspective. He didn't have the same bias that mainlanders had about training young women to compete. So he started the rough water swimming contest. So they would jump in the ocean and they would go from the Santa Monica Pier, or sometimes the Ocean Park Pier, down to the Venice Pier. He would get them in the water. He would compete against them as a coach and just push them, right? This is how I'm going to do it alongside you. That's why kids loved him. Parents loved him. Not only did he save their kids, but he taught them too. A coach, a mentor, and a teacher. Notice what they're wearing too. Those are men's bathing suits, and I think that's because of Freeth as well. So not only was it safer, but it cut their times. They would swim faster. The Amateur Athletic Union did not allow women to compete. They did not want them in their contests. And Freeth didn't care, because women have this long tradition in Hawaii of swimming and rowing and surfing. So that's what he brought to California. He brought them to contests anyway. And they competed before and after the men. The AAU would not register their times because they weren't allowed to be members, but Freeth trained them and he promoted them. One of the things, there are many innovations that he did, but part of those innovations are in lifeguard equipment. Here he is, again, with Ludi Longer. 1913, Redondo Beach. He's got this buoy and wire reel system on that tripod. So you can imagine what would happen if you swam out to try to save somebody. What's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to grab a hold of you, and then there's maybe two people in trouble. Right? So he came up with this buoy that you could push towards the person, and that buoy looks dangerous to me, right? It's metal, it weighs about 40 pounds. It's pointed on both ends, but it was better than anything else, I guess. I mean, it was sort of aquadynamic, I guess. You could swim that through the waves as opposed to the big round thing that you would have to haul, right? So they have improved that buoy, afterwards. But at the time, it was revolutionary. So you could take that buoy into a belt, and then one of the lifeguards would swim out. He could push the buoy towards the person in trouble, and then the lifeguard on shore would reel them both in. This is another innovation. I mean, you saw that tripod, right? You're not going to run that thing down the beach. Sometimes they would get a call and the lifeguards would have to run a mile down the beach and, running in sand for a mile. And then you have to swim out and make the rescue. So he came up with the idea, how about I take that tripod, mount it on a motorcycle, and do my rescues that way? And that's something that lifeguards still use today, right? So he could increase the range and the efficiency of his rescues on that motorcycle. You can fit multiple lifeguards on it. You can see the buoy on the left-hand side. The reel is mounted on the back. And then there's a medical box. There would have been a resuscitator in there, and then various medical supplies. And then you could stretch the victim out on top. I love this shot. So this is 1913. Freeth got into Hollywood a little bit too. So Max Sinnott, who made the Keystone Cops, he made a short, silent film of George Freeth and this motorcycle called The Latest in Life-Saving. And it's the only film that we know of Freeth actually in action. And that's Ludie Longer, looking a little nervous, the heroine. So they came up with this plot where a man was trying to pick up a woman and he accidentally bumped her off the pier and landed her on the ocean. And then they had to call Freeth and Longer to go save her. So they arrive on the motorcycle and they have the Keystone Cops there, doing what they do. All this slapstick. So if you go on YouTube and just search out George Freeth, The Latest in Life-Saving, you can see it's about 7 minutes long. So this is the heroine at the end, after she's clunked her boyfriend on the head with the Keystone Cop stick, and then she's giving him a kiss to the two guys who saved her. So Ludie Longer is looking a little nervous, like he doesn't know where to put his right hand as he's getting this kiss. And there's Freeth, really confident. He's got his arm around her, And I just love it because he's looking at the camera and he's smiling. This is the last frame of the movie. So he gets hired to be the swim coach. He actually broke his ankle on that motorcycle. He was flying to rescue. Some guy selling newspapers popped up in front of him. He yanked the wheel and ran into a telegraph pole. But on crutches, he arrived in downtown Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Athletic Club is the most prestigious club, private club in all of Los Angeles, right? It's a who's who. Everybody's in that club. And he gets hired to build the best swim team in the nation. So he gets Duke Kahanamoku, the most famous swimmer, gold medalist from the 1912 Olympics, to join the team, right? Pulls him out of Hawaii. They grew up together. They were friends. Freeth was 7 years older. And you can see Freeth there working with Duke. So we did two things with Duke. Duke was getting a little bit slow by this time. This is 1914, so 2 years after he won his gold medal. People are starting to beat him in short races. So Freeth says, come on down to Los Angeles and I'll help you. So he helps Duke on his flips and on his starts, right? So Duke has these massive legs, but he's not really using all the power that he can. So what Freeth did is, if you've ever been in the Los Angeles Athletic Club pool, it's 32 feet wide. It's still there today, that building. I went in, after I read about this, I'm like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go swim in that pool. I'm going to kind of float where Freeth did. So it's 32 feet wide, and he would line up next to Duke, the fastest swimmer in the world, and said, I'm going to race you to the other side. Go. And Freeth beat him every single time. So how did he do that? Well, in the short distances, Freeth had a better start. He could jump farther, right, than Duke. So what he did was he took this stick and he put it 6 feet. But it's 6 feet out from the edge. And if Duke couldn't jump over that stick, he'd crack his ankles every time. So soon, Duke got good at using those powerful legs to get farther on the starts. And then the same thing with his turns, to sort of flip and push off that edge. And then there were no Olympics in 1916 because of World War I. But by 1920, thanks partly to Freeth, Duke was back in gold medal form, and he actually won the gold medal that year as well. And here's Freeth and Duke. I think that's Duke. That has to be. They're at Ocean Park, clowning around. There was a contest there. I don't think anybody knows this is Duke, but I knew that both of them were there. And you can't quite see Duke's face because Freeth's elbow is right there. But they're surfing a lifeguard buoy, just goofing around, rode it and surfed it in. But I think that has to be Duke behind him. So he leaves Los Angeles area. He's the first one to surf in Orange County that we know of in 1914. In June, they opened the municipal pier down in Huntington Beach, and they invite Freeth to give exhibitions, which he does. In 1916, he goes down to San Diego, and the San Diego Rowing Club hires him. They want him to do the same thing that he did for Los Angeles. Duke unfortunately left the Los Angeles Athletic Club. He went back to Hawaii, and a few weeks after that happened, Freeth resigned from the Los Angeles Athletic Club. We don't kind of know all the details, but Duke got pulled away and Freeth left, and he wound up in San Diego. And here he is introducing aquaplaning to San Diego, being pulled behind a motorboat. But I love this picture because you can just see how fit he is, how tan, and how he just loves what he's doing. Remember that picture of Cliff Bowes standing on his head? This is what Freeth used to do at Waikiki during exhibitions. Again, he's an entertainer, he's a performer. And just look how rock solid he looks in that headstand, right? Like you could see those Olympic gymnasts, they do stuff like this, right? Unfortunately, the year that Freeth arrived in California, just after 1908, the Amateur Athletic Union decided that lifeguards were professionals and they were banned from all Olympic competition. So Freeth was blocked as a swimmer in 1908 from the Olympic trials and as a diver in 1912 from the Olympic trials. So he had Olympic dreams. Unfortunately, he was blocked. He's running the San Diego Rowing Club, but he comes back up to Ocean Park to compete. So Ludi Longer is the top swimmer in the nation at this time. This is 1916. He is swimming a mile in the ocean, and this is the mile contest that Freeth started in Ocean Park. So Freeth wins this. Norman Ross would bring 5 medals in the 1920 Olympics, came in second. And then 2 of Freeth's swimmers that he trained in San Diego, they came up and they got 3rd and 4th. So he'd only been in San Diego a couple months and already his swimmers are placing in. He's keeping that connection with this area. World War I is coming to a close, it's winding down a little bit. 13 people drowned in Ocean Beach down in the San Diego area. You may have heard of this in one day. 10 of them soldiers. So these bad rip currents, they only had 1 lifeguard on duty. So what they did was they tried to figure out how did this happen and let's make sure that it doesn't happen again. So who are they going to call, right? George Freeth. He's in the area. He's in San Diego at the rowing club. We call him up and say, George, can you come up to the beach? He'd been giving surfing exhibitions there, so he knew Ocean Beach. Can you tell us how to fix this problem? And they hired him for the summer, and he brought his motorcycle. They gave him a motorcycle. You can see the buoy there. There's the same setup. He hires lifeguards. He trains them. It's not enough just to have the equipment. You got to have the training too. And they never have a problem for the rest of the summer. So they closed that beach for a whole month until Freeth got his dories, got all his equipment, got his guys trained, and then they ran off with the summer. So it was a kind of professional lifeguard organization that had Freeth lived would have continued, but that organization, those types of organizations didn't arrive in Los Angeles County until the late 20s. Right? So it took almost a decade because Freeth wasn't around. Again, this is a great picture of Freeth at Ocean Beach, Jimmy McIntosh. I love this for a couple of reasons. This is on the cover of the book. Number 1, he's leaning against a surfboard. It's got the lifeguard dory behind him. So again, the 2 pieces of equipment that, in my mind, represent the foundation of California beach culture, the surfing and the lifeguarding. And plus, I just love his casual California beach cool look here, right? He's tan, he's fit, his arms are crossed. Like if you're walking down the beach and you pass this guy, you just know you're safe. You know he's going to take care of you. You know nothing's going to happen to you, right? And that kind of beach cool and that kind of confidence that he had in himself, he instilled in others. And that was absolutely necessary for the growth of California beach culture. So he's fit. He's at the top of his game. He's 35 years old. World War I is winding up in Europe. There's a global flu pandemic that's also winding up. Nearly 50 million people have died. Freeth catches it in the 3rd and last wave in San Diego He spends 10 weeks in the hospital fighting it. He's on his recovery, he's back on his feet, and then he gets pneumonia and goes into his lungs and he dies. 35. And then because he's gone, lifeguarding hasn't been institutionalized. And so you have this talented, skillful, charismatic guy who all of a sudden he's gone. And then, because it's not institutionalized, lifeguarding it's up to each individual town. They just hired him for the season. And you can see what happens. So it probably sets lifeguarding back in terms of professional organization about a decade at least. So that's my brief introduction to Freeth and his time period and why I think he's important. Thank you so much for